Imagine this. You've just gone through a breakup with someone you love. Your world feels heavy. Your heart feels raw, and all you want are answers. But instead of comfort, instead of closure, what you're left with is silence, cold distance, a wall that seems impossible to break through. If your ex is an avoidant partner, this is often exactly how things unfold. Today, we're diving deep into what really happens when an avoidant partner ends a relationship, or even when you're the one who ends it. We'll talk about why they act the way they do, what no contact looks like from their side, what the so-called discard actually means, and most importantly, what happens next, both for them and for you. So let's slow down, breathe, and really understand this dynamic step by step. An avoidant partner is someone who, often unconsciously, fears intimacy. They crave connection, but also feel suffocated by it. When things get too close, too vulnerable, too emotionally demanding, their instinct is to pull back. Not necessarily because they don't care, but because closeness triggers a deep, often childhood-rooted fear of being engulfed, controlled, or losing themselves. Think of it like this. While one person may see closeness as safety, the avoidant sees it as danger. When they sense expectations, needs, or vulnerability from their partner, their nervous system doesn't read it as love, it reads it as pressure. And pressure for an avoidant almost always equals withdrawal. This is why relationships with avoidant partners can feel like a constant dance of push and pull. One moment, they're there, present, connected, even deeply loving. The next, they're gone, distant, cold, and hard to reach. Now, when it comes to a breakup, this attachment style plays out in painful ways. For many avoidant partners, breakups aren't a sudden snap decision. Instead, they often build internally for weeks or months. The avoidant slowly distances themselves emotionally, sometimes even physically, long before the final goodbye. By the time the actual breakup happens, they've already been preparing. They've convinced themselves that leaving is the safer option, the calmer option, the option where they can breathe again. That's why, to the person left behind, it can feel like your partner suddenly switched off their emotions overnight. It's not that they didn't once care, it's that they've learned to suppress that care in order to protect themselves. And that suppression can look incredibly cold. Many people describe this moment as the discard. It feels as if the avoidant partner simply throws the relationship away, like tossing out something that once held value. But here's the truth. Avoidants don't actually discard their partners in the way it seems. What's really happening is emotional self-preservation. The avoidant believes that shutting the door completely, detaching and cutting off is the only way to survive the overwhelming pressure of closeness or conflict. The problem is, from the outside, this looks like cruelty. It looks like they never cared. It looks like you never mattered. And that's why the discard is one of the most painful stages for the person on the receiving end. Now let's talk about no contact. When you go no contact with an avoidant, or when they do it first, the experience on their side is very different from what you might imagine. At first, many avoidants feel relief. The space allows them to reset. They no longer feel the weight of expectation, the fear of being pulled too close. They often distract themselves with work, hobbies, casual connections, or anything that keeps them feeling independent and free. But here's the catch. That relief doesn't last forever. Over time, the loneliness creeps in. The quiet becomes too quiet. They start to remember the good moments, the comfort, the laughter. The very intimacy they once pushed away begins to feel like something they miss. This is why avoidants often return weeks, months, or even years after a breakup. Their cycle isn't linear. It's relief, then curiosity, then longing. And sometimes, it's regret. So what actually happens next after the breakup, after the discard, after no contact? For the avoidant, there are usually a few possible paths. Some avoidants stay locked in their pattern. They convince themselves the relationship wasn't right. They seek distraction, and they push emotions so far down they rarely resurface. Others come back around, sometimes casually, with a text like, "Hey, how have you been?" Other times more seriously, with admissions of missing you or wanting another chance. Whether or not this return leads to real change depends on whether they've done the inner work to face their fears of intimacy. In some cases, the breakup itself becomes a wake-up call. The avoidant begins therapy, self-reflection, or growth practices that slowly shift their attachment style towards security. It's rare, but it happens. And then, of course, there's you. What happens next for you is just as important, if not more. If you've been on the receiving end of an avoidant breakup, the pain is real. The silence, the coldness, the sudden absence. It all leaves scars, but here's the deeper truth. Their reaction is not a reflection of your worth. Avoidants don't withdraw because you weren't enough. They withdraw because closeness itself feels threatening to them. That's their wound, not yours. Your healing begins when you stop trying to decode their every action and start turning inward. Ask yourself, what did I need in this relationship that I wasn't getting? How can I give that to myself now? Where are the places in me that still long for approval, validation, or closeness at any cost? The more you answer these questions, the more you move towards secure attachment within yourself. Here's the hardest truth and the most liberating one. You can't control whether your avoidant ex comes back, changes, or heals. What you can control is the story you tell yourself about what happened. Instead of seeing it as rejection, see it as revelation. This person showed you their limits. They showed you the edges of their capacity for intimacy, and in doing so, they also showed you what you truly need in a relationship. Someone who can meet you in the middle, who doesn't fear your closeness, and who doesn't punish your vulnerability. So if you're sitting in the aftermath of an avoidant breakup, remember this: the silence isn't proof that you didn't matter. The discard isn't proof that you weren't enough. And no contact isn't the end of your story. Avoidant partners operate from wounds that run deep. Their distance is about their fear, not your value. And while some may eventually circle back, the most important chapter here is not about what happens next for them, it's about what happens next for you. You have the power to heal, to grow, and to build relationships that feel safe, mutual, and secure. The breakup may feel like an ending, but in truth, it can be the beginning of the strongest, most grounded version of yourself. So breathe, trust that you are worthy of love that stays, and take the first steps into your own healing journey. Because what happens next, ultimately, is in your hands. When you really look closely at an avoidant partner after a breakup, the most striking thing isn't their silence, it's the contrast. How someone who once laughed with you, shared your bed, shared their stories, even whispered promises late at night, can suddenly act like you don't exist. That sudden distance cuts deep. And because it's so shocking, your mind often becomes obsessed with making sense of it. You replay conversations, you scan for clues, you wonder if you did something so wrong that it flipped a switch in them. But the truth is, it was never one moment that caused this shift. It's an entire pattern, deeply ingrained, that shows itself most clearly in times of closeness and conflict. The avoidant partner often feels safer in fantasy than in reality. They might idealize relationships in the beginning, when intimacy is still optional and closeness feels like a choice. But once real vulnerability enters, needs, expectations, long-term commitment, their nervous system goes on high alert. To them, love starts to feel like a trap, and when the fear of entrapment becomes stronger than the desire for connection, the only solution they know is escape. That escape can come in the form of breaking up directly, pulling away until you break it off for them, or emotionally disconnecting until the relationship collapses under its own weight. No matter how it plays out, the effect is the same. They retreat, and you're left holding the silence. For you, this silence is torture. For them, it feels like relief, at least at first. Imagine living in a room where the walls slowly close in day by day. Even if that room is filled with someone you love, eventually the shrinking space feels unbearable. When they finally step out of the relationship, it feels to them like a breath of fresh air. That's why their post-breakup behavior can look confusingly detached. They may seem fine. They may even seem happy, diving into distractions, hobbies, work, or casual flings, and you might sit there wondering how they moved on so fast while you're barely able to breathe. But avoidance is never freedom. It's a pause, it's distance bought at the cost of real connection. And when the initial relief wears off, the quiet begins to echo. Slowly, memories filter back, the safety of having someone who understood them, the small routines, the warmth of touch, the comfort of companionship. It all starts to surface. Many avoidants don't admit it, but they feel the ache of loneliness just as deeply as anyone else. The difference is, they've trained themselves to bury that ache under independence. Yet what is buried isn't erased. It waits and it returns. That's why so many avoidant partners eventually circle back after months or even years, not always with commitment, not always with change, but with a longing they can't fully explain. For you, though, the critical question is not whether they come back. It's what happens to you in the meantime. You could wait, analyzing every silence, every imagined chance of reconciliation, or you could choose to heal. Healing doesn't mean you stop loving them overnight. It doesn't mean the pain vanishes. It means you redirect your energy away from chasing their approval and into building your own foundation. It means realizing that your worth doesn't shrink just because someone else couldn't embrace intimacy. Think of your life as a house. If you place your partner at the center of it, their leaving feels like the walls collapsing. But if you place yourself at the center, their absence hurts. Yes, but your house still stands. Healing after an avoidant breakup is rebuilding your house with yourself as the cornerstone. It's learning to give yourself the stability, the validation, the love that you once looked for in them. And let's be honest, healing isn't linear. There will be days when you miss them so much you want to break. No contact just to hear their voice. There will be nights when the silence feels unbearable. That's normal, but every time you resist the urge to chase what is running, you strengthen your own foundation. Every time you redirect that energy into your growth, your goals, your joy, you reclaim your power. Over time, you'll find the silence hurts less. You'll notice moments of peace, then stretches of peace, until one day the thought of them doesn't pull you under anymore. As for your avoidant ex, their journey is their own. Some will never change, locked in their patterns for life. Some will soften with age, loneliness, teaching them what their fear once denied them. And a few will take the brave step of facing themselves, doing the hard inner work to shift towards secure attachment. But you can't control which path they take. You can't force their healing, and you don't need to, because your story is not bound to theirs. So what really happens next, after a breakup with an avoidant partner? What happens is choice. They may retreat, distract, or return. But for you, the choice is to remain stuck in their cycle, or to step out of it, to keep waiting for the crumbs of their attention, or to decide you deserve the feast of a full, open-hearted love. To define yourself by the silence they left behind, or to define yourself by the strength you build moving forward. And that brings us to the conclusion. Breakups with avoidant partners are some of the most painful because they leave you not only with heartbreak, but with questions that seem unanswerable. Yet the truth is simpler than it feels in the storm. They pulled away not because you weren't enough, but because closeness overwhelmed their fear. The discard wasn't proof of your unworthiness, it was proof of their limits. No contact isn't punishment, it's protection, for both of you. And what happens next doesn't have to be determined by their cycle. It can be determined by your choice to heal, to grow, and to move toward the love you truly deserve. So breathe. Step back into yourself. Let the silence be the space where you rebuild. And when the day comes that you're ready to love again, you'll do so not from a place of fear or scarcity, but from wholeness. Because at the end of this journey, the most powerful thing you'll discover is that you never needed their closeness to prove your worth. You only needed your own acceptance to finally feel free.